Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Jamie. This channel is about fitness, healthy recipes, tips and tricks to succeed on your fitness journey, also motivation and some challenges and fun. So if you're into that, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so that you are alerted when I come out with new videos. Today's video is going to be about popular questions when it comes to counting your macros. I have a special guest today. His name is Dan Sudbeck. He's the founder of Macro Counting 101. He has assisted in over 30,000 clients on their fitness goals. He's a certified nutritional coach, and he's going to be joining us today and answering some really popular questions and questions that you might be curious about yourself. And at the end of the video, I'll attach some of my progress pictures when I did Dan's macro counting boot camp. So he has a boot camp as well where he coaches people and he does custom macro plans and all that sort of fun stuff. Stay tuned because there'll be a series number 2 of this video where I'll go into more detail on macro counting as a whole and how to physically do it. So I'll be putting the actual food into an app and showing you all that stuff and doing more of a basic overview and what macronutrients actually is. So stay tuned for that video. It's going to be more beginner friendly. This video kind of just dives right into the details. Without further ado, let's introduce Dan Sudbeck and let's get going. Thank you so much. All right, guys, so I'd like to introduce you to Dan Sudbeck. He's the nutritional coach that we're going to be talking to today about macros.
Happy to be here.
Question number 1 I got from, I think my Instagram account. I got a few questions in. So we're going to just go through those one by one, and Dan's going to provide us some professional advice. Why should we count macros? Why shouldn't we just count calories? What's the benefits of counting macros versus just counting calories?
Sure. So the idea behind macros is calories are really going to be the thing that determines whether or not you gain weight, lose weight. But macros will definitely affect that body composition as you lose weight or gain weight. So if you don't have your macros dialed in and you're losing weight, potential comes about that you may lose more muscle mass if we're not getting adequate protein. When we're talking about macros, we're also talking about giving your body the right nutrients to fuel your day. So that's another big component too when we're talking about macros over just calories is we're trying to optimize performance, your energy, along with your body composition and not just solely looking at the scale and saying, is the weight number going up or going down? So that's the big difference between calories and macros.
How does a person know the ratio of how many macros they should be intaking, for example? How much protein should I be intaking? How much fat and carbs? And why do some people eat higher fats versus higher carbs? Or what's the science behind that?
Well, it's a loaded question, and I could probably take an entire hour talking on this. This is why we do the custom macro plans and we take a look at these as professionals. But the idea behind it basically is we take a look at a person and their activity levels. We look at their current body composition. So that's a big player. If a person is, say, obese versus somebody that's super lean and super fit, their protein needs relative to their body size is going to change. We also take a look at their activity. Typically, most people will find that if they're super active, they'll be fueled better by more carbohydrates in their diet versus somebody that's more sedentary. That amount of carbohydrates is going to shrink, and therefore, as a ratio of their total calorie intake, fat usually goes up. So it's not necessarily that that person needs more fat, it's just that they need less carbs. So that's going to move the needle there. The intensity of a workout is definitely going to drive whether or not you need more protein or less protein. So if your activity and your workouts are, going for walks, that's not going to be breaking down as much tissue as somebody that's doing CrossFit for an hour, 7 days a week. So your protein needs will vary depending on that. Fat and carbohydrates for a lot of people can kind of be interchangeable. I usually recommend a minimum amount of fat. There's key aspects of fat. The fact that we need to absorb vitamins, and a lot of the vitamins that we need in our body are fat soluble. So you need fat for that. A lot of fat goes into the development of hormones in our body, and also tissue throughout our body. So fat's important. We can't just kind of say, okay, fat is bad, we can't have any of that. So there's certain levels and minimum requirements that I recommend for most people. And then after that, it kind of comes down to those other things, their activity levels, their body composition, their goals. I think that I glanced over that, but that's a big player here too, whether or not you're trying to lose weight or gain weight, gain muscle. Macros are going to look a little bit differently based on that. So it's hard to like say hard and fast, here's what everybody's macros should be. It's definitely geared towards the individual.
Yeah, it's not a cookie cutter plan, that's for sure.
Right.
I remember my first custom macro program from you. You gave me a fat number and I freaked out. I was like, what? I can't eat that much fat. I always had the impression like lower fat, lower body fat percentage, and that was like what I thought, and I would eat the most minimum amount of fat I possibly could just because of that, but there's so much more to it, and I'm glad I learned that from you and from your boot camp. That's not true, and that's kind of like a myth that a lot of people think, is that fat makes you fat, and try to eat as minimal as possible.
Right.
So I'm definitely a guilty person of that thought.
There's definitely people on the other side of that too, where they think carbs make you fat. And I probably get more pushback on the carb side of things. They're like, I thought I needed less carbs. And it's just kind of misinformation that's out there in the world as far as, you know, what drives a person's body composition. Not to say that some people might, and that's where carbs and fats are interchangeable to some degree, in that looking at those other things like health, looking at performance and how a person feels, plus also enjoying the foods that they eat to some degree. You know, unless you're an elite level athlete, a lot of this whole process of macros is to generally just feel better, lose a little bit of weight, get a better body composition. And we don't need to be in those ultra severe, super dialed in type macro plans that would make adherence really tough. I would rather see somebody enjoy more foods that they're eating and be more successful over a long period of time. So that's another factor that I factor into when I'm writing macro plans. What that looks like for a person is, you know, what's their experience? Are they coming at this from a, you know, elite athlete standpoint, or are they coming at it from, I've never tracked a gram of food in my life, you know, how do I start?
Right, and it's also more sustainable that way too.
Absolutely.
If you're miserable, it ain't gonna last very long. Let's go into what kind of apps should somebody use to track their macros? Do you have a specific one that you recommend?
I've kind of been in the MyFitnessPal camp for a long time. I'm maybe waning a little bit. I know Under Armour just pulled the rug out from underneath them and the funding that was behind that. So I'm looking at other ones potentially. The key features that you want in an app are the, you know, scan features, always really nice, makes things convenient, and if it's more convenient, you're going to be more likely to use it. Being able to adjust the serving size, I think, is super important. So being able to go from, you know, if you scan something and the packaging says that it's 162 grams per serving, it's nice to be able to adjust that serving size to say 1 gram, so that put 111 grams and the serving size is 161, you don't have to do crazy math to figure out what you actually need to log. So that's another important feature of an app. Other features that I really look for, especially when I'm, you know, working with clients, is being able to look at weekly averages. I think a lot of times, especially early on, I put more emphasis on weekly averages when we're talking about how a person is doing as far as hitting their macros versus micromanaging their day-to-day stuff. So being able to pull up a chart or a graph or something that says, here's what your weekly averages was, that's another important feature. And a recipe functionality is a good function to have. So lots of apps have those. I'm not totally set on any particular one. There's a few that I don't like, but I won't throw them under the bus.
Yeah.
Keto, partner. No.
I've tried a few before, but yeah, MyFitnessPal has always been my favorite just because it's easy to use, very user-friendly. It would be awesome if they had like a better tool that could help you actually calculate your serving size without actually having to do the math.
I think they did just add in a functionality where you could take a picture of your plate. I haven't tried this yet, and it will guess the food that you're eating and the portion sizes and log it for you.
Ooh.
Maybe okay for a beginner. Obviously, somebody that wants to get a little bit more dialed in, that's not going to be the best approach. So.
Yeah. Wow, that's some extreme technology if they can do that and estimate the
right
and all that. That's pretty insane. So let's move on to the next question. So I sign up for MyFitnessPal and they already give me macros. Why do I need to change that? Why can't I, if I put in my goals, my weight, my body fat percentage, and say how much I want to lose per week, doesn't it already customize macros for me? Why do I need to go above and beyond and get a more customized plan?
Sure. A lot of those are just kind of algorithms that people plug in and they say, okay, if you do this, then you check these boxes and you fit into this category. They don't take into account the personal effect. Like I said, taking into account, is this person, have they ever tracked an ounce of food in their life versus somebody that's an elite athlete that's looking to go from, on the female side of things, maybe 18% body fat to 14% body fat and get ready for a physique competition. So there's nuance there. There's things that manual calculation like that just I don't think is going to get right. Plus, I think as humans, this is one of the biggest things when I have people submit plans is I see people really overestimate the amount of activity that they do. And then with that, what happens is a lot of these apps and websites that will just spit out macro numbers for you will over-exaggerate calorie intake. And with that, then you don't see results. Or the flip happens is they want people to get fantastic results and drop 5 pounds in the first week. And they've set up their calculations to be so calorie restrictive that it's more of a marketing ploy, in my opinion. Maybe I'm throwing these people under the bus. It's like, okay, you're 200 pounds, go ahead and eat 1,300 calories. You'll lose weight really quick. You'll be miserable after 3 weeks, but hopefully in that first 3 weeks, you tell people of all the fantastic success you had. So they're going to go to your website or app, download it, and see the same success. But everyone's going to burn out after 3 weeks because you're miserable and you're not eating enough.
Right.
Maybe that's what's happening. Maybe they just really want to help people and don't know better. I don't know, but it's okay to get started that way. Mm-hmm. I think to some degree, but then the problem that happens is a lot of people that are new to this whole concept don't know how to make adjustments. So if they're feeling hungry, what do I do? And that's kind of where I take this is like I throw out numbers and I say, okay, here's what I think you should be at. But then as a coach, I'm helping people go, here's how you feel, here's what's happening to your body composition, here's your hunger levels and cravings and all this stuff. Let's make some adjustments. So having that ability to move the numbers around, I think, is ultra important. Mm-hmm. And the average person just won't know, and they'll struggle through those first 3 weeks and be miserable. And that's the difference between, I think, sometimes the apps versus getting something more custom.
Yeah, a lot of people feel like they just want results as fast as possible. What can I do to get to where I want to be as fast as possible? So I think the apps try to make that happen because the majority of the people would prefer to get results as fast as possible. So if they can achieve that goal, then they'll get more customers, at least initially, and that's how it spreads. Let's see. How do you come up with macro numbers for your clients, and how often would you change those?
So I adopt first part of that question, how do I come up with the macro numbers? Kind of touched on that a little bit as far as activity, age, sex, height, weight. Those are the kind of base numbers that you'll look at somebody to figure out what we would call their basal metabolic rate. Then from there, we tack on their activity. So I take a look at their daily activity outside of exercise. And then I also take a look at exercise frequency, intensity, and take a look at all of those numbers. And then from there, we basically figure out, okay, this person roughly burns X amount of calories per day. And then we work based on their goals. If they want to lose weight, we knock some calories off so that they're in a calorie deficit. We set up macros that suit them for their situation. And then hopefully that works. And I'd say most of the time we get it pretty close. And people are eating a comfortable amount of food and seeing results at a comfortable pace. We don't fast track people to really move super fast. I would rather have somebody, stick with it long term, and I'm not that crash diet kind of person. So, what was the second part of the question?
How often do you change somebody's macros?
Sure. So I adopt the philosophy of, is it working? Very simply, that can look very differently for a lot of people. So I've had clients where, I've had one example, somebody went from 145 pounds down to 130 pounds, and I never touched their macros for, I think it was 14 weeks. They just steadily lost weight, about a 3/4 of a pound to a pound per week. And, they got to a fantastic place. And then I've had other people that, are coming out of, a chronic diet history that we've had to manipulate and go through a reverse diet. So those people were changing things potentially every single week in order to slowly ramp up calories. So it really varies depending on the person, but it's all comes back to, is it working? So is this helping us achieve our goal, our end goal? And that's really where it's at. So it's not like a super cut and dry. Some kind of red flag's probably the wrong term, but some flags that will go off is like after a person loses maybe roughly 10% of your body fat, anywhere from 5 to 10% is kind of or gains. That would be a situation where you'd want to assess, where you'd say, okay, hey, is this still working at this point? A lot of people think if they lose 5 pounds, they need to cut their calories. I don't really find that to be the case most often. I usually find that as a person starts losing weight, they become a little bit more active. They start walking more. They're a little bit more mobile. So oftentimes activity through the NEAT, non-exercise activity, will go up as they start losing weight. So that kind of counteracts the change in body size. So that's something that comes into play. So that, any type of stall. So, if somebody were to stall out for, potentially 2 to 3 weeks, depending on how closely and how good their adherence was to a plan, maybe we'd look at changing things if somebody's plateaued for 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks, depending on the situation.
Yeah. So I think you kind of already touched on this question also, but do different body types require different macro ratios like protein, carbs, and fat in order to lose fat but build muscle? So what does that breakdown look like? So somebody's trying to lose weight and build muscle at the same time. Is that like a lot of people think that they should be eating more, but also at the same time they're trying to lose fat? Is that something that you work with often, and how do you split that up?
Well, the lose fat, gain muscle, that's like the magical unicorn of body composition change, and everybody wants it. It's very hard to accomplish, in my opinion. I use the analogy of it's like if I were to try to make an addition to my house and I tear down this wall right behind me and use those materials to build on something outside of my house and expand my house. So I'm taking the fat and turning it into muscle. It's not a perfect thing. It's like, okay, now I got to use sheetrock to build a foundation. That's not going to be the best situation there. So typically, let me go to the first part, body types. Loosely, I adjust things there. There's some, I don't want to say fantastic. There's not any really hard and fast good evidence on this, but it kind of matches up a little bit with body type, is where you're more endomorph, short, stocky, big bone type person. You'll read some things that say that person might be more of a fat burner versus your tall, slender ectomorph is going to be more of a carb burner. But I maybe gravitate towards that. What typically happens is the endomorph is probably a little bit more sedentary. The ectomorph is probably a little bit more active. Drawing generalizations here, it's not the case for everybody, but that inherently will go, okay, if you're more sedentary, less carbs. If you're more active, more carbs. So that's maybe how that moves a little bit. Once again, let's start with a baseline and then adjust. So that's usually where I go. As far as goals, typically somebody that's looking to lose weight, we set them up typically in a pretty balanced plan. You'll find some people that get really aggressive with the protein because protein does help you lose weight faster. But once again, going back to the idea of will you be able to stick with it long term, that's a whole nother situation. So if we throw 40% of your calories into your protein bucket, that's gonna feel and taste, and the experience is going to be much more like, this feels like a diet. I hate diets, so therefore I'm not going to stick with that long term. Plus, most people aren't used to eating that much protein, and that's going to just really screw somebody up. So weight loss, typically macros are going to look a little bit differently. As we start moving towards maintenance, typically what happens is obviously calories are going up. Usually protein and carbs are coming up a little bit, along with fat slightly too. But the idea there is protein's really going to be, to stay on the analogy of building things, that's going to be your building blocks. That's going to be what creates the addition. So if you're looking to gain muscle, you need to make sure we have enough resources in the form of protein in order to make those additions. So typically as a person moves closer to the goal of gaining muscle, gaining weight, gaining body size, that person's going to be at a higher protein amount per day versus, and I say amount, percentage probably comes down, because at some point, if you're just adding on to your body size, you need just calories. So those can generally come from anywhere. Versus the person that is trying to lose weight is going to probably be a slightly lower protein amount with their plan. So, yeah.
So would you say that you would recommend tackling one thing at a time first? So I said, for somebody who wants to lose fat and build muscle, would you say, how about you focus on losing the fat first, then building the muscle?
Yes. Yeah, there's super small segments of the population that can have that magical unicorn body composition switch. But for most people, if you've been kind of training regularly, I would say typically the threshold for women I typically don't want to move to a gaining muscle phase until they hit about 20% body fat, roughly. Potentially a little bit higher depending on a person's goals, but usually that's kind of the threshold, about 20% body fat, where you say, okay, let's just get the body fat off, see how we look. Everyone's going for a look more so than the number on the scale, I think. So that's kind of that threshold for women. For men, anywhere from 10 to 15% is kind of that threshold.
When can you take a break from tracking every meal? Do you ever get tired of tracking? Do you track all the time?
No, I don't track all the time. The idea behind this, and I think it can be overwhelming if you walk into this and you go, okay, I got to track my food for the rest of my life. That's not what, at least my approach to macros is all about. my approach is, let's teach somebody how to eat. Let's teach somebody that when they look down at their plate of food, that they can probably guess within, 50 to 100 calories, how many calories are on that plate. They can look down at that plate of food and they can say, okay, there's a pretty good protein source. There's probably something nutrient dense. Typically I push vegetables and that type of thing. So that's going to make up the bulk of a meal. Not bulk in the sense of it's the most, but maybe it could be, in that it'll fill you up. And then we can fill in the gaps, potentially with some carbs or fat or whatever it is. So that's kind of my approach with macros, is teaching people what a plate of food should look like, being able to estimate how many calories are in certain things, so that if and when they move away from tracking, that they can kind of keep things in check. And then another thing too, that I think macros and tracking will help a person with, is when they have those treat meals and go out for a special occasion or whatever it is, that they go, okay, I know I'm going out. I know I'm going to have high carb, high fat, low protein, calorie dense meal tonight. So then you backfill the rest of the day, and you can kind of start thinking about your day that way, rather than just kind of going about your normal course of action throughout the entire day and say, okay, now I'm going out for 1,500 calorie dinner. Awesome. And you already had 1,500 calories earlier in the day because you just kept things the status quo. That's, I think, where macros really helps, is that kind of planning and thinking about the balance of your day over time. So from how often you need to track, personally, it's totally up to you and your goals. I think it's a fantastic way to really dial things in. So if you want to push your physique to a higher level, absolutely, you probably need to be tracking. If you're comfortable at just feeling good about the way you are, use myself as an example. I'm probably in the, 10 to 15% body fat range. I feel pretty good about my body. I'm not looking to go step on a fitness competitor stage. I'm not getting obese. I'm watching all of that. I'm not tracking right now. I'm managing all of those things I mentioned, and I'm doing just fine. Now, if I want to, reverse a year, I was kind of going through a bulking phase. I was tracking. I was planning on, getting into a cut. Unfortunately, I got injured, and the fitness competition that I was going to do got canceled. So now I'm just back to normal life. And for me, normal life means not tracking, because I've been doing it long enough that I know all of those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because it is a lot of work, and it can get tiring to be weighing out your food and planning how you're going to hit those numbers every single day. It is a lot of effort. It is a lot of extra work, but I definitely agree that it's a good starting place for somebody who doesn't really know how to eat in a way to fuel their body in the best way and get to their goals in a healthy way. So yeah, that's awesome. This is kind of a question that I got a lot, and it was now that COVID has impacted our daily life and we're all not being as active as much as we used to be, how does that affect my macros? Should I be changing my macros due to that? Or if I know that I'm going to be not as active for just a short span of time, like maybe a week or 2 weeks, should I also adjust my macros? Or is it more just like a long-term, I'm not going to be active type of thing? Like, for example, you got injured. Maybe you're not working out as hard. Maybe you want to drop back calories.
Yeah, certainly. So we start with goals. We always start there, and then we start with, is it working? So we kind of work in that progression. So if all of a sudden our activity goes down, we stay, okay, should our goal stay the same? I think a lot of times that, a lot of people, whether it be injury, whether it be, hey, surgery, what other things have come up? I'm traveling and I can't work out, and they want to maybe continue to push their weight loss. That would look differently for people. Somebody like you that's pretty fit, I would probably say, let's not push weight loss super hard if we're having to step back from working out and exercising. The thing that happens is somebody that's, smaller and leaner already, you're going to have to get into a calorie deficit and eat at a pretty low calorie level. And then also on the flip side of that, you're probably going to lose a higher percentage of muscle mass, which obviously we don't want to do. So that's one little thing there, is we take a look at the time frame potentially. We take a look at the person and we say, okay, this person's pretty lean. They're only going to be sidelined for a week, or they're on vacation for a week, or whatever it is. Let's maybe just go to maintenance for a little bit. Versus if it's, talk about the COVID situation, now it's, coming up on a year, if that's lowered your activity because you're working from home and you're not walking around an office building, then yeah, we probably want to address that, and we want to lower calories to match up to that activity so that you can continue to see success. I'm not a huge fan of pushing and getting really aggressive with weight loss if a person isn't exercising, unless they fall into kind of the obese, morbidly obese categories, just because of that idea that they will lose a higher percentage of muscle mass. Somebody that's 300 pounds has a lot of muscle, believe it or not. It takes a lot of work to carry that body mass around. So they can sacrifice a little bit more versus, say, the 130-pound female that's at 20% body fat. They don't carry as much muscle, and we don't want to lose it because it's really hard to get it back. So once again, it really depends on the situation. That's probably the theme of this one. But that's kind of how I would approach it is, yeah, we want to match up activity to your calories and macros. If it's a shorter duration, then maybe we can just kind of hit the pause button on weight loss until we can get back to our normal activity, whether it be an injury, travel, something like that.
Yeah, so there's a ton of variables that come into play here. It's not like it's not a one-size-fit-all again.
Right.
Which is kind of the theme with macros. It's never a one-size-fit-all sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, this is actually a question that I'm super curious about, and it's how long should I stay on a cutting plan for versus bulking and maintenance? Like, how long should I cut for? How long should I bulk for? Is there like a time frame that you want to typically aim for? Because I know you don't want to eat under calories for too long, because that can affect your metabolism and all sorts of other things.
Sure. That, once again, staying on the theme, kind of depends a little bit on the person and their comfort level, because as you bulk, inherently you're going to gain some body fat. I haven't found anybody that has never gained any body fat on a bulk. It just happens. So the things that start happening is you start getting a little softer. The definition goes away. And the comfort level of the person, as far as, moving down that road, will really dictate whether or not how long they want to push that bulking phase. Typical bodybuilder world, or just, somebody that wants to be kind of super fit, typically wintertime, we're covered up a little bit more. Let's push a bulking phase during the wintertime. And then as we start shedding clothes and showing off our body a little bit, we start cutting. That's a pretty good cycle for most people if you're in more of the bulk and cut cycle. Which, if your goal is to, push your physique, going back to your earlier question about gaining muscle, losing fat, bulking and cutting is probably the best strategy to do that, I believe, for most people. So typically, I would say a bulking plan might be anywhere from 4 to 6 months. Cutting, depending on how much you need to cut. Typically, I look to have people lose anywhere from 0.5 pound to maybe 1.5 pounds, depending on their body size, per week. So you just kind of reverse engineer that. And if you've got an end goal of by July 4th, I want to be X weight and X body composition, you just kind of work backwards from that based on all of those things.
Yeah, so it's kind of like goal dependent. Where are you at your goal? Like, are you at your goal, or that would kind of determine what's the next phase for you.
Yeah, and that comfort level. I mean, it's not, I would say bulking is, people are going to probably be mad at me, bulking and eating in a surplus is harder than cutting. Just, cutting, it's easy, but when you're bulking, you are eating. It's your job. Training is your job. And if you aren't training like it's your job, then you're going to be gaining more body fat. So you're eating a lot of food. Like one of the biggest pushbacks I ever get with people in macro plans is, I don't think I can eat this much food. So, add 1,000 calories to that and I'll try it. It's tough. So, yeah.
And we're talking clean bulk, not ice cream, big bowl
Right.
of ice cream. And,
Yeah. I mean, you can do some of that.
Yeah.
That's the thing about macros. But yeah, you can definitely dirty bulk or clean bulk, but either way, you're going to be gaining body fat.
Yeah. What if I'm going out to eat? What should I do if I can't find what I ordered off the menu in MyFitnessPal? What if I can't find the nutrition facts? What should I do?
Estimate to the best of your ability. Especially if you're new to this, I think, understanding the calorie content, going back to the idea of, when you become an experienced macro tracker, being able to look at a plate of food and say that thing has 750 calories on it, and here's rough estimation of what the macros is. That's the end goal with all of this. So when you're going out to eat and you can't find something, start figuring out, okay, here's probably roughly what was in that food. So in my boot camp, I always use the example of like chicken Alfredo pasta at Olive Garden. So you look down at that and okay, there was probably 3 cups of pasta, assuming you eat the whole thing. There's probably 6 ounces of chicken. There was a lot of sauce on that. So what you can do is you can look up that food in MyFitnessPal and you can find, or whatever app, and you can find lean cuisine, chicken Alfredo, and you can have, the ultra rich homemade cream sauce, cheese, all the deliciousness at the high end. And you can kind of start doing a little mental work there and you say, okay, how big was the portion size? That's going to move the needle towards the top end. And then you go, okay, how rich was it? Was it delicious? Probably going to move the needle a little bit higher. And you can kind of scale things. And then generally speaking, I typically recommend that people over-exaggerate portion sizes a little bit. So if you think it was 2 cups of food, let's go with 2.5 or 2 1/4, depending on how dialed in you are. That just gives you a little bit of a leeway because they slide in fat in places, they slide in carbs in places, sauces, those types of things, and it's probably better in those situations to overestimate your portion size a little bit to hopefully catch some of those calories that snuck in there.
Okay. How do you track alcohol? Say I have 2 glasses of wine and it says 200 calories, but it only says it has 19 grams of carbs or less. But where's the other calories going to go to?
Yeah, that's definitely a popular one. So alcohol has 7 calories per gram. So that's where that mystery calories are when you're looking those things up in whatever app that you have. So typical glass of red wine, 4 ounces, is going to probably be 80 to 90 calories. It's probably going to have 3 to 4 grams of carbs. Those mystery calories, so you kind of have to do calorie math as I explain it. And for the sake of keeping math simple, let's just assume you have a 100-calorie beverage. What I typically recommend is we have to account for those calories somewhere. So I use the analogies when I'm talking about like what's most important is we've got a calorie bucket that every single day we want to get really close to filling that up. We've got a protein bucket, carb bucket, and fat bucket. And at the end of the day, we take all of those buckets, and those buckets from carbs, fats, and protein fill up the calorie bucket. Alcohol is kind of on its own. It doesn't have a bucket, so it has to displace some calories from one of those buckets. We don't want to steal from protein. Protein's the building blocks that keeps us healthy and maintains our lean body mass. So we don't want to steal from that bucket. We don't want to displace calories there. So it's either the carb bucket or the fat bucket. For the sake of making things easy and because we have the most flexibility, typically with most people with carbs, I generally recommend stealing from your carb bucket and displacing those calories. So in that 100-calorie beverage instance, what I would do is do some calorie math, and you kind of have to work backwards. Is carbs have 4 calories per gram. So that 100 calories is the equivalent of 25 grams of carbohydrates. So that's what we would have to avoid, or I don't know if that's the right term, from eating actual carbohydrates. Is alcohol carbohydrates. Is not that it is 25 grams of carbs, it's just it has to be accounted for somewhere. So a little tip that I share with people is you can actually create your own food. So you can go into MyFitnessPal and you can create a food. If you typically, Jamie, if you're a red wine drinker, and you can create Jamie's red wine, and you can say it's 100 calories, and you can set it up to be a lot for all of those calories to be 25 grams of carbs. So when you're tracking and you log that, it automatically registers in your carb bucket, so that the day you don't have to do this like mental gymnastics with math and go, okay, I had wine, so I need to stay short on this amount of calories or grams here. Some people will take some from fat, especially if you're maybe having multiple glasses of wine or multiple cocktails. We may have to steal from different buckets. But then also too, if it's a special occasion, you want to go have a few, and then just get back on track, and don't worry about, beating yourself up and hitting your numbers exactly. If you can, stay within your calorie budget, but maybe the macros are a little bit off on that day.
All right. That's good advice for sure. So how often can I have a cheat meal? How often can I go over my macros? And when I know I'm going to have a big cheat meal and I'm going to go over, should I still track it, or should I not track for that day?
That's, so how often can you have a cheat meal? Kind of depends a little bit on your goals. So obviously the person that is pushing their physique to a higher level and trying to dial in that last little bit, that person's variance from being super strict is going to be a lot tighter versus the person that is trying to go from 300 pounds to 250 pounds. It's going to look a lot differently. So that comes into play. Mm-hmm. A lot of times you can make a cheat meal fit, and I prefer the term treat meal a little bit. Cheat makes you feel like you're screwing up, whereas the cool thing with macros is you can fit the treats in and you can still hit your numbers on any given day. Maybe you have to adjust portion sizes. So, let's go back to the fettuccine chicken Alfredo dish I mentioned. Mm-hmm. So, how can you make that meal fit your macro plan? So maybe we get a chickpea pasta that's higher in protein, and we use that so that our protein numbers stay up while not totally blowing up our carbs. Maybe we add more chicken to it and have a higher percentage of the calories coming from chicken. Maybe the Alfredo sauce, we splice in some cottage cheese or some higher protein kind of dairy Greek yogurt to add some protein there, so that you can still have that treat meal that typically wouldn't be considered diet food, and you make it fit perfectly into your plan. Or, as I mentioned before, if you're going to be blowing things up at night and go out and have all the things, then take a look at the rest of your day and do your best to kind of lighten things up there. Eat more protein-dense food, eat more vegetables, have the salad, have the egg whites or the protein shake for breakfast. Keep things light so that you're not like doubling down on your calorie overages. That's kind of how I would approach that. A lot of times I kind of break that up, and I talk about this in one of my topics in the group coaching that I teach. But eating out of necessity versus eating out of indulgences, and we have to make that distinguish between the two. Let me go with that. In that, a lot of people, because they're tired and they don't want to cook, they're like, I need to go get fast food, and they make that meal a treat meal, and it shouldn't be. So at that meal, it's maybe going to Chick-fil-A and getting a side salad and grilled chicken nuggets versus going to Chick-fil-A and getting the breaded fried chicken sandwich and a side of French fries. So you're eating out because you need to, because just life dealt you those cards. Then you go that route versus it's my anniversary, it's my birthday. Then we can mix in some more of those splurges and we can plan for it. It's not like a birthday sneaks up on you or it's like, I know it's coming. So, you can plan for it and lighten up the rest of your day.
All right. So would you say macro counting for everyone? And say I'm a beginner and I have no idea what I'm going to do. How do I start? Where do I learn to do all these things we talked about today? What can they do? Where can they go?
Is macros for everybody? Long-term, absolutely not. I'm an example of that. I don't love tracking my food every single day. In the short term, I think it can be a fantastic tool for people to learn so that it gives them the process to manipulate their body weight. We've got a saying where the weight loss isn't the success when you start tracking macros, it's learning the process to change your body composition. That's where the win really comes. So by learning the process, then you can really be in control of what you want to do with your body composition, because essentially macros, we're taking, get a little geeky here. We're taking kind of the scientific method approach to our body composition and food, and we're controlling variables, and we're saying, okay, let's put some guidelines and some limits on all of these things, and then we figure out, is it working? You're taking it through the scientific process and saying, that worked, that didn't work. Okay, let's change one variable and then we'll test it out again. And then that's how we're moving through this process. So that's really how a person can figure out what works for them in their individual situation. And that's the cool thing about macros, is it really controls a lot of variables so that you can really figure out what works best for your individual situation. And then with that, I think we talked about this a little bit, so I'll just glance over it again. It's a fantastic tool so that when you look down at a plate of food, you know how many calories are in it, you know roughly maybe what the macro percentages are of that meal, and then you can kind of balance your days out and say, if I'm having pizza for dinner, I need to go lower fat at breakfast, and kind of have that ebb and flow throughout your day, and be able to plan that out to some degree. And usually if you can do that, you can usually manage your calorie intake, because our bodies are, if you're healthy metabolically, that's a whole other tangent, we won't open up that Pandora's box, then we will be able to kind of take care of our body composition and our overall weight, and we'll eat the right amount of food and not overeat. So where can you learn about this stuff? The interwebs. No,
Cookie cutter plan.
If you're okay, I'll plug my group if you're okay with that. I've got a Facebook group, Macro Counting 101. My group on Facebook is geared a little bit more for beginners with this. I saw that was a missing component. I was parts of other macro groups across Facebook, and I'm like, these people are just jackholes, talking down to these beginners, and there wasn't a safe spot where somebody could go, how many calories are in a gram of protein, without getting beaten up and asking the simple questions. So that's kind of the premise behind my Facebook group, Macro Counting 101, is helping get people onboarded. Within that group, I've got, I think like 3 or 4 different units, Facebook calls them, where they can kind of learn the steps and kind of get onboarded as far as like those basic steps, what tools you need, how many calories are in a gram of protein, all of those basic things. You can walk through all of that. I've got information on my website, macrocounting101.com. That's another resource. I've got paid group coaching things. I write custom macro plans, if that wasn't apparent throughout this video. So that's another option, to help you get dialed in and make sure that you're getting off probably at a better starting point versus just going out to the interwebs and using whatever random calculator pops up number one in your Google search. So that's on website macrocounting101.com. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I think we got a lot of information. I'm going to try to wrap it all up, and I'm going to link the links in the description below and let you guys know where you can get a custom macro plan, where you find Dan, and all that sort of fun stuff. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Bye.
All right. Bye.
All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you have all your questions answered and you generated more questions. Drop them in the comments below. If you're new here and you like what you saw, or you like fitness tips, tricks, recipes, and fitness motivation, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you here. And stay tuned for the next video, because I'm going to dive into more details for maybe people who are more beginners to this macro idea, and show you how to weigh out your food, what kind of scale to use, what mobile app I use, how I input the data. So stay tuned for that. And if you want me to go in more detail on any of these topics, drop a comment below, let me know. And thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.